Jasmine enters an upscale boutique expecting to browse for a gift, but the store owner's baseless accusations turn her visit into a public humiliation. As whispers swirl and eyes judge, Jasmine's quiet strength hides a truth that will leave everyone stunned. What happens next is a powerful tale of resilience, justice, and the downfall of prejudice. Will Jasmine's integrity triumph over hatred? Stay tuned to witness a story of courage that will move you to your core. The ornate gold lettering on the glass doors of Harrington Jewelers glistened under the afternoon sun. It was a boutique synonymous with exclusivity and luxury, located in the heart of the city's most upscale shopping district. Inside, the store exuded opulence, with its pristine marble floors, glistening chandeliers, and display cases that seemed to shimmer with diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires. Everything about the store screamed sophistication, except for the unspoken prejudice lurking beneath its polished surface. Behind the counter stood Mr. Robert Harrington, the store's proud owner. In his early 60s, with silver-streaked hair slicked back, he was dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit. His demeanor matched the store's ambiance, sharp, meticulous, and undeniably elitist. Harrington had spent decades building his reputation, catering to the city's wealthiest clientele. But those who didn't fit his vision of affluence were often greeted with a cold, scrutinizing glare. Beneath the surface of his charm was a man driven by assumptions and quiet arrogance, quick to judge based on appearances. The store was unusually quiet for a Saturday, giving Harrington time to adjust the positioning of a diamond necklace in its velvet-lined display case. As he straightened the piece, the small bell above the door jingled, signaling a new customer. Harrington's eyes flicked up, and his expression shifted ever so slightly, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. Jasmine Williams entered with an air of quiet confidence. She was in her late 30s, her poise and elegance radiating as she stepped onto the marble floor. Her caramel-toned skin glowed under the store's soft lighting, and her tailored cream coat hinted at a polished professional life. Around her neck was a delicate gold chain, and she carried a designer handbag, which she placed gently over her arm. Jasmine had come to Harrington Jewelers with a purpose, to find the perfect piece of jewelry for an upcoming gala celebrating her latest professional milestone. As she walked further into the store, Jasmine's discerning eyes scanned the dazzling displays. Her presence was commanding, yet she exuded warmth. She didn't notice Harrington's hawk-like gaze fixed on her, assessing her with an intensity she'd experienced far too often in her life. Harrington stepped forward, a practiced smile spreading across his face. "Good afternoon, madam," he said smoothly. "May I assist you with something specific today?" Jasmine turned, her own polite smile meeting his. "I'm browsing for a necklace, something timeless yet bold." Harrington nodded, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "Certainly," he said, motioning toward one of the cases. As she approached, his gaze lingered, noting the absence of ostentatious jewelry on her person. He questioned silently whether she could truly afford anything in his store. Jasmine leaned down, admiring a striking emerald pendant framed by tiny diamonds. "This is beautiful," she remarked, her voice steady and appreciative. "Yes, it is," Harrington replied, the edge of condescension creeping into his tone. "That particular piece is one of our more exclusive designs. Perhaps I could show you something more modest?" Jasmine's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. "No, thank you," she said firmly. "I'd like to see this one." Harrington hesitated, his hand hovering over the case. He cleared his throat. "Of course," he said, pulling out the necklace with calculated precision. As he placed it on the counter, he added, "It's quite expensive, you know. A piece like this is meant for someone with a discerning eye, and the means to appreciate it." The words hung in the air, unspoken assumptions embedded within them. Jasmine's eyes flicked up, meeting his gaze. There was a subtle, sharp defiance in her expression now, though her voice remained calm. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't appreciate fine craftsmanship," she said. The tension in the room was palpable. Harrington's smile tightened as he tried to regain control of the interaction. "Of course, madam," he said quickly, but his patronizing tone did not go unnoticed. As Jasmine continued browsing, Harrington remained close, his presence looming. She moved to another display, admiring a vintage diamond bracelet, and Harrington's suspicions deepened. He watched every movement, every gesture, as though waiting for her to make a misstep. Nearby, one of the younger sales associates watched the scene unfold. Though she remained silent, her brows furrowed as she noted the stark difference in Harrington's demeanor compared to how he treated their wealthier, white clientele. Harrington's growing unease was evident in the way he subtly adjusted his cufflinks and glanced toward the security camera. His judgments, so deeply ingrained, were now fueling a quiet storm that was bound to escalate. As Jasmine reached for another piece, Harrington finally spoke again. "Madam," he said, his tone sharper now. "I must ask, do you have any specific items you intend to purchase today?" Jasmine blinked, taken aback. "I haven't decided yet," she replied carefully. "Is there an issue?" His smile was gone now, replaced by a thinly veiled look of suspicion. "No issue at all," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "It's just that we don't allow unnecessary handling of merchandise unless there's an intent to buy." The subtle insult landed like a slap, but Jasmine remained composed. She straightened, meeting Harrington's gaze with unwavering strength. "I see," she said evenly. "I'll be sure to let you know when I've made my decision." Harrington's nostrils flared slightly, but he said nothing. As Jasmine continued browsing, the weight of his prejudice filled the air. The stage was set, and the conflict brewing between them was about to erupt. The soft chime of the store's bell announced the arrival of new customers, and the quiet hum of polite conversation filled the elegant space. Jasmine stood by the display case, still admiring the vintage diamond bracelet. The faint smile on her lips belied the tension simmering just beneath the surface. She could feel Mr. Harrington's gaze boring into her back, each glance heavy with suspicion. "Excuse me?" Mr. Harrington said suddenly, his voice sharp enough to pierce the air. He stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. His tone carried an edge that silenced the soft murmurs of the other customers. Jasmine turned, her calm eyes meeting his. "Yes?" Harrington crossed his arms, his expression a mix of condescension and feigned authority. "I believe we have a problem," he said, gesturing toward the counter where the emerald necklace Jasmine had admired earlier still lay. She frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand." He pointed an accusatory finger. "That necklace is missing." A heavy silence fell over the store. Jasmine's breath hitched, and for a moment she was too stunned to speak. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Harrington interrupted, his voice growing louder. "I'm stating a fact. The necklace you were handling is gone, and you were the last person to touch it." The accusation hit her like a slap. Jasmine's initial shock quickly gave way to a simmering anger. "I didn't take anything," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the injustice of the moment. "Perhaps you should empty your bag," Harrington said coldly, ignoring her denial. Jasmine's fingers tightened around her purse, her knuckles white against the beige leather. "Are you seriously accusing me of theft?" By now, the other customers had stopped browsing, their attention drawn to the escalating scene. A woman near the counter whispered to her friend, while a man by the door looked on with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. Harrington's gaze swept the room, his tone taking on a performative quality as if he were addressing an audience. "I'm simply following protocol, madam. When expensive items go missing, we must investigate." Jasmine's jaw tightened. She felt the eyes of the other customers on her, some curious, others wary. The humiliation burned in her chest, but she refused to let it show. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "If it will end this ridiculous accusation, go ahead and search my bag." The words were spoken with quiet defiance, but Harrington seized the moment as if he had already won. He reached for her bag, but Jasmine stepped back, holding it out of his reach. "You'll wait until security arrives," she said, her tone icy. "You won't touch my belongings without my permission." The shift in her demeanor caught him off guard, but Harrington quickly recovered, snapping his fingers toward a nearby employee. "Call security," he barked. The tension in the room thickened as the employee hurried off, leaving Harrington and Jasmine locked in a standoff. Despite her composed exterior, Jasmine's mind raced. The indignity of the situation stung, but she knew better than to let her emotions get the better of her. One of the other customers, a middle-aged woman in a tailored coat, stepped forward hesitantly. "I don't think she—" "Please, madam," Harrington cut her off, his tone curt. "Let us handle this." The woman recoiled, retreating back into the cluster of onlookers. Moments later, a tall security guard entered the store, his brow furrowed as he approached. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Harrington wasted no time explaining, pointing dramatically at Jasmine. "This woman was handling a necklace moments before it went missing. I'm asking that her bag be searched to confirm she doesn't have it." The guard turned to Jasmine, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, do you mind if I take a look inside your bag?" Jasmine exhaled slowly, her grip tightening on her purse. "I have nothing to hide," she said, holding it out. The guard took the bag and opened it carefully, pulling out its contents: her wallet, a set of keys, a folded notebook, and a neatly packed makeup pouch. The missing necklace was nowhere to be found. "There's nothing here," the guard said after a thorough search, his tone neutral. Jasmine extended her hand, and the guard returned the bag with a nod. She turned to Harrington, her eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Satisfied?" Harrington's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. "There must be some mistake," he muttered. "The only mistake," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the room like glass, "was your baseless assumption that I would steal." The murmurs in the room grew louder. A few customers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from doubt to disapproval toward Harrington. "I'd like an apology," Jasmine said, her words deliberate and unwavering. Harrington stiffened, his pride warring with the growing judgment from his clientele. "I was only doing my duty," he said weakly, avoiding her gaze. Jasmine stepped closer, her voice low but sharp. "Your duty was to treat me with respect. Instead, you chose to humiliate me based on nothing but your prejudice. That says far more about you than it ever could about me." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Harrington looked genuinely unsettled. Jasmine straightened her shoulders, her dignity intact despite the ordeal. As she turned to leave, the customers parted like a wave, their eyes filled with newfound respect for the woman who had stood her ground. Jasmine held her head high, but the fire in her chest remained, fueling her determination to ensure this moment would not define her, or end here. As the store's heavy glass door swung shut behind her, Jasmine stood on the bustling sidewalk, her breath visible in the chilly afternoon air. Despite the crowd moving around her, she felt profoundly alone, a knot of anger and humiliation twisting in her chest. Jasmine clutched the strap of her handbag tightly, her knuckles white against the beige leather. The accusatory tone of Mr. Harrington's voice replayed in her mind like an unwanted echo. "That necklace is missing." The words felt heavier now, their weight pressing down on her like lead. She had been judged, not for her character, but for the color of her skin. Blinking back tears, Jasmine inhaled deeply, forcing herself to regain composure. Crying on a busy street wouldn't help her, but the hurt was raw, sharper than she had anticipated. She had experienced subtle biases before, dismissive tones in meetings, assumptions about her capabilities. But this was different. This was direct, brazen, and deeply personal. What Mr. Harrington and his customers didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that Jasmine was far from ordinary. She was a woman of remarkable accomplishments, though she had always carried herself with humility. Born to immigrant parents who instilled in her the values of hard work and perseverance, Jasmine had climbed her way to the top through sheer determination. She was the founder of a successful interior design firm, her creative touch sought after by luxury clients across the country. Her philanthropic efforts were just as impressive. Jasmine had spent years mentoring young women of color, funding scholarships, and creating opportunities for those who might otherwise be overlooked. Despite her achievements, she had chosen to live her life with quiet dignity, rarely drawing attention to her success. But standing outside that jewelry store, the irony of her situation was undeniable. The man who had so casually accused her had no idea she could have bought anything in his shop 10 times over. And yet, none of that mattered in his eyes. The more Jasmine reflected on the incident, the angrier she became. Her feelings were a tangled mix of hurt and fury, not just at Mr. Harrington, but at a society that allowed such prejudice to persist. She had done everything right, worked hard, and played by the rules. Yet here she was, reduced to a stereotype, by a man who didn't even bother to hide his bias. Her phone buzzed in her bag, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from a friend asking if she had found the perfect piece for her upcoming gala. Jasmine stared at the screen for a moment, the weight of the event now feeling secondary to the injustice she had just faced. She typed a quick response, "Still looking," and slipped the phone back into her bag. For a moment, she considered returning to the store and confronting Harrington again, demanding the apology he had refused to give. But a deeper part of her knew that wouldn't satisfy her. The damage was already done, and his apology, if given, would mean little. What Jasmine wanted wasn't a hollow gesture. She wanted change. Later that evening, Jasmine sat in her tastefully decorated living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. She held a steaming cup of tea in her hands, but her mind was elsewhere. The events of the day had left her drained, but as she stared into the flames, a sense of clarity began to take shape. Jasmine had always believed in using her voice to uplift others, to challenge systems of inequality. This moment, as painful as it was, felt like a call to action. She thought about the young girls she mentored, how she encouraged them to stand tall, even in the face of adversity. If she allowed this moment to pass without action, what message would that send? Her reflection was interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing again. This time, it was her assistant. "Ms. Thompson," the message read, "just confirming the details for tomorrow's board meeting. Let me know if you'd like me to adjust anything." The reminder brought a faint smile to Jasmine's lips. Few people knew she sat on the board of one of the most influential advocacy organizations in the country. Tomorrow's meeting, as fate would have it, was focused on addressing racial discrimination in business. Her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about her. This was about ensuring no one else had to endure what she did today. By the time Jasmine set her cup down, her plan was clear. She would return to that store, not as a customer seeking justice for herself, but as a force for systemic change. Harrington needed to be held accountable, not only for his actions, but for the culture of discrimination he perpetuated. But she wouldn't storm in with accusations. That wasn't her style. Jasmine believed in strategy, in leveraging her resources to make a lasting impact. She picked up her laptop and began drafting an email. The subject line read, "Urgent, incident report, discrimination at luxury boutique." It was addressed to a colleague in the advocacy world, someone with the power to ensure this story reached the right ears. Jasmine outlined the details of her experience with precision, her words measured but impactful. Before sending it, she paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her mind flashed back to Harrington's face, the arrogance in his tone, and the humiliation she had felt. With a deep breath, she hit send. As Jasmine closed her laptop, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she was no longer the humiliated customer who had been wrongfully accused. She was a woman with a plan, a voice, and the means to ensure that voices like hers could no longer be ignored. Jasmine glanced at her calendar, noting the gala in a few days. She had been searching for the perfect piece of jewelry to complete her outfit. But now, that felt trivial. What mattered was that when she stepped onto that stage to speak, she would carry this experience with her, not as a burden, but as a spark for change. For Mr. Harrington, the storm was just beginning, and though he didn't know it yet, he had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. The morning sun streamed through the expansive windows of Mr. Harrington's jewelry store, casting reflections off the glittering displays. The atmosphere was unusually quiet. Customers were sparse, and the employees exchanged uneasy glances. Something had shifted since the incident with Jasmine, though Mr. Harrington dismissed it as a passing phase. He perched behind the counter, meticulously polishing a diamond bracelet, when the sharp chime of the doorbell interrupted him. A young assistant hurried in, clutching a tablet. "Mr. Harrington," she stammered, her face pale. "You need to see this." She placed the tablet on the counter, and his eyes scanned the screen. It was an article from a prominent online news outlet. The headline read, "Prominent entrepreneur faces public humiliation in jewelry store, a case of racial bias." The accompanying photo showed Jasmine, poised and radiant, delivering a speech at a recent gala. She wore an elegant gown, her presence commanding, with an air of intelligence and confidence that seemed worlds apart from the woman Mr. Harrington had humiliated days earlier. The article detailed her accomplishments as the CEO of a multi-million-dollar interior design firm and a leading philanthropist advocating for marginalized communities. It also recounted her experience at Mr. Harrington's store, describing the false accusation and public humiliation in vivid detail. Mr. Harrington's face drained of color. He reread the article, each word sinking deeper into his chest. The last line hit him like a punch. Jasmine Thompson has vowed to take action, ensuring that no one else endures the same injustice. The article spread like wildfire across social media, with Jasmine's followers rallying behind her. Comments poured in, expressing outrage and disappointment at Mr. Harrington's actions. "This is unacceptable," one user wrote. "Boycott Harrington Jewelers." Another added, "How dare he treat her like that?" Jasmine Thompson is an icon. She deserves better. Even customers who had once been fiercely loyal to Harrington Jewelers began questioning their patronage. Mrs. Langley, a longtime client, called the store that afternoon. "I've spent years buying from you, Mr. Harrington," she said, her tone icy. "But after hearing what happened, I'll be taking my business elsewhere." One by one, cancellations and refund requests poured in. Mr. Harrington's reputation, once untarnished, now hung by a thread. In his office, Mr. Harrington paced furiously, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. "How could this happen?" he muttered, his mind racing for damage control. But no matter how much he tried to justify his actions, the image of Jasmine's calm yet defiant expression haunted him. He remembered her parting words. "You'll regret this." At the time, he had dismissed her as another disgruntled customer. Now he realized the gravity of his mistake. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat in her sunlit office, surrounded by a small team of advisors. On her desk lay a stack of emails and letters, messages of support from people who had read her story. Some were from individuals who had faced similar prejudices, sharing their own experiences of being mistreated or judged unfairly. "I don't want this to just be about me," Jasmine said, her tone resolute. "This is bigger than one incident. It's about holding people accountable and creating change." Her assistant nodded. "The public is already on your side. We could take this further, press charges, launch a formal complaint with the Business Bureau." Jasmine considered her options. She wasn't driven by revenge, but by the desire for justice. "Let's start with a public statement," she decided. "I want people to know that I'm not staying silent, but I also want to approach this with dignity." Later that evening, Jasmine posted a heartfelt message on her social media accounts. No one should be judged by the color of their skin or the stereotypes in someone's mind. What happened to me was humiliating, but it's something many people face every day. I've spent my life building a career and giving back to my community, only to be reduced to a thief in the eyes of someone who didn't take the time to see who I am. This isn't just my fight. It's a fight for everyone who has been treated unfairly because of bias or prejudice. Together we can push for accountability and ensure this doesn't happen again. Thank you to everyone who has reached out with support. Your voices matter, and so does this cause. The post garnered thousands of likes, shares, and comments within hours. It became a rallying cry for change, with users sharing their own experiences of discrimination and pledging to support Jasmine's mission. Back at the store, the fallout intensified. Reporters began calling for statements, and protesters gathered outside, holding signs that read, "No room for racism," and "Accountability starts here." Some employees quit, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. Others confronted Mr. Harrington directly, demanding to know why he had acted as he did. "This isn't who we are," one staff member said. Or at least, it shouldn't be. Mr. Harrington, once so confident in his decisions, found himself scrambling to contain the damage. Jasmine's legal team filed a formal complaint against Harrington Jewelers, citing discriminatory practices and defamation. The case caught the attention of local news outlets, further amplifying the story. But Jasmine's approach wasn't purely punitive. Behind the scenes, she worked with advocacy groups to create resources for addressing racial bias in business. She also partnered with organizations to offer training programs for businesses like Harrington Jewelers, emphasizing the importance of diversity and inclusion. "I don't want to destroy his business," Jasmine said in an interview. "I want to change the way we think, the way we act, and the way we treat each other." As the pressure mounted, Mr. Harrington reached out to Jasmine, requesting a private meeting. Hesitant but curious, she agreed. They met in a neutral location, a conference room with a long wooden table and floor-to-ceiling windows. "I've made a terrible mistake," Mr. Harrington began, his voice heavy with remorse. "I judged you unfairly, and I can't undo what I did, but I want to make things right." Jasmine studied him carefully. His words sounded sincere, but she knew actions spoke louder. "If you're truly sorry," she said, "then use this as an opportunity to change, not just for yourself, but for everyone who works for you and shops at your store." Mr. Harrington nodded. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The meeting ended with an agreement. Mr. Harrington would implement mandatory bias training for his staff, donate a portion of his store's profits to organizations promoting racial equality, and publicly acknowledge his mistake. For Jasmine, the fight wasn't just about one store or one person. It was about setting a precedent for accountability and growth. As the days passed, the jewelry store slowly began to rebuild its reputation, not as a symbol of exclusivity, but as a place that had learned from its mistakes and embraced change. For Jasmine, the experience was a reminder of her strength and the importance of using her voice. Though the journey had been painful, it had also been transformative, sparking a movement that would outlast any single incident. The sound of muffled voices filled the courtroom as spectators settled into their seats, anticipation buzzing in the air. At the front, Jasmine sat poised and confident, her lawyer by her side, a stark contrast to the visibly tense Mr. Harrington. His once proud demeanor now seemed diminished, his shoulders hunched as if trying to shield himself from the weight of the moment. The lawsuit had quickly gained traction, not just because of Jasmine's prominence, but because of the irrefutable evidence she had brought to light. Video footage captured by a fellow customer clearly showed the entire incident at Harrington Jewelers, from Mr. Harrington's baseless accusation to the moment Jasmine calmly but firmly walked out of the store. Coupled with witness statements and public outrage, Jasmine's case stood on solid ground. As the proceedings began, Jasmine was called to the stand. She took a deep breath, locking eyes with her attorney before stepping forward. Her tailored navy suit exuded professionalism, and her calm, collected demeanor spoke volumes. "Ms. Thompson," the attorney began, "can you describe the events that transpired on the day in question?" Jasmine recounted the incident with precision and clarity, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I walked into the store intending to browse for a gift. I had no idea that simply because of how I look, I would be treated like a criminal. Mr. Harrington accused me without cause, humiliated me in front of other customers, and called security before I even had a chance to explain myself." Her words hung heavy in the room, the silence amplifying the gravity of the situation. "Did you ever attempt to steal anything from Harrington Jewelers?" the attorney asked. "No," Jasmine replied firmly, her gaze unwavering. "I am a law-abiding citizen and a successful businesswoman. The only thing I carried with me that day was my dignity, which Mr. Harrington tried to strip away." The courtroom's focus shifted to the screen as the video footage played. Gasps echoed as the scene unfolded. The condescending tone of Mr. Harrington, the uncomfortable murmurs of other customers, and Jasmine's dignified yet visibly upset departure. The footage was damning. It left no room for doubt about Mr. Harrington's prejudiced behavior. When it was Mr. Harrington's turn to speak, his lawyer attempted to frame the incident as a misunderstanding, claiming that Mr. Harrington had acted out of caution rather than malice. But the jury's skeptical expressions made it clear that this narrative wasn't landing. As Mr. Harrington stammered through his testimony, his gaze occasionally darted toward Jasmine, whose composed presence only heightened the contrast between them. "Mr. Harrington," Jasmine's attorney interjected during cross-examination, "is it standard practice in your store to accuse customers without evidence, or was this an exception?" Mr. Harrington hesitated, beads of sweat forming on his brow. I acted on instinct," he muttered. "Instinct?" the attorney pressed. "Or bias?" The room was silent. Mr. Harrington's lips pressed into a thin line, his refusal to answer speaking louder than words. During closing arguments, Jasmine's lawyer delivered a powerful statement, summarizing the case with eloquence and conviction. "This case is not just about a single incident," he said, addressing the jury directly. "It's about a pattern of behavior that goes unchecked when we allow prejudice to dictate our actions. Ms. Thompson's experience is a stark reminder of how dangerous assumptions can be, not just to individuals, but to the very fabric of our society." Jasmine's own statement followed. She stood before the courtroom, her voice calm, yet resolute. "This isn't just about me," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "It's about every person who has been judged unfairly, who has been made to feel small because of someone else's biases. I'm standing here not just for justice, but to make it clear that this kind of behavior cannot continue." Outside the courtroom, reporters and protesters had gathered in droves. The case had become a lightning rod for discussions about racial bias and accountability. Placards reading "Justice for Jasmine" and "End Racial Profiling" dotted the crowd. As the trial concluded, the judge ruled in favor of Jasmine, citing overwhelming evidence of discrimination. Harrington Jewelers was ordered to pay significant damages and implement mandatory diversity and bias training for all employees. The public reaction was swift and decisive. Former customers of the store shared their own negative experiences, further tarnishing Harrington Jewelers' reputation. Social media exploded with calls to boycott the establishment, and local news stations aired segments dissecting the case and its broader implications. Back at his store, Mr. Harrington faced the full weight of his actions. Foot traffic dwindled to a trickle, and several longtime employees resigned, unwilling to be associated with his tarnished brand. He sat alone in his once thriving boutique, the glittering jewels around him a hollow reminder of his former success. The respect and exclusivity he had once prided himself on were now replaced by shame and isolation. For Jasmine, the victory was bittersweet. While the legal battle had been won, the emotional scars of the incident lingered. Still, she felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing she had turned her pain into a powerful message. As she stepped out of the courthouse, greeted by a sea of supporters, she smiled faintly. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who believed in fairness, equality, and the courage to stand against injustice. The crisp morning sunlight filtered through the city streets as Jasmine sat by her living room window, gazing at the bustling world outside. Though the weight of the courtroom battle still lingered, there was a renewed lightness in her heart, a sense of vindication that transcended her personal victory. Jasmine's triumph in court had made headlines, sparking conversations far beyond the confines of Harrington Jewelers. Media outlets covered the story extensively, with headlines highlighting her courage in standing up against discrimination. Social media lit up with messages of support, and organizations dedicated to racial equality reached out to amplify her voice. Empowered by her victory, Jasmine decided to use her platform to advocate for change. She partnered with advocacy groups to launch a campaign promoting awareness of racial bias in customer service industries. The campaign included workshops for business owners and employees, focused on fostering inclusivity and recognizing implicit prejudice. At a community event, Jasmine stood before a packed auditorium, her voice clear and resonant. "This isn't just about one jewelry store," she said. "It's about a system that allows discrimination to persist unchecked. We have the power to change that, not just through accountability, but through education and empathy." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring others to share their own stories of prejudice and resilience. Jasmine's message was simple yet profound. Change begins with awareness, but it's sustained through action. Meanwhile, Harrington Jewelers found itself grappling with the fallout of Mr. Harrington's actions. Public outcry had decimated the store's reputation. Customers canceled orders, vendors severed ties, and even longtime employees resigned, unwilling to be associated with a business mired in scandal. The store's once glittering showcases now stood under dimmed lights, with few visitors venturing in. Mr. Harrington himself faced mounting pressure to step down as owner. Despite his initial denial and defiance, he was eventually forced to sell the business. For Mr. Harrington, the humiliation was profound. The consequences of his arrogance and prejudice were inescapable, forcing him to confront not only his behavior, but the beliefs that had driven it. Whether he would learn and grow remained uncertain, but the community had sent a clear message. Discrimination would no longer be tolerated. Reflecting on the ordeal, Jasmine found strength in the overwhelming support she had received from allies, friends, and even strangers. The experience had been painful, but it had also revealed the power of resilience and the importance of standing firm in one's principles. One evening, as she flipped through letters and messages of encouragement, a particular note caught her eye. It was from a young woman who worked in retail, thanking Jasmine for her bravery. "Your story gave me the courage to stand up for myself at work," the note read. "Thank you for showing me that I'm not alone." Jasmine smiled, her heart swelling with pride. If her experience could inspire even one person to believe in their worth and demand better, then the struggle had been worth it. As Jasmine stood before her bathroom mirror that evening, she thought about how much the incident had taught her, not just about the world's flaws, but about her own strength. She realized that her voice, once dismissed, now carried the weight to drive change. With renewed determination, Jasmine turned off the lights and headed to bed. Tomorrow, she would continue her work, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt unseen or underestimated. For Jasmine, the resolution wasn't just about justice. It was about paving the way for a future where dignity and respect were not privileges, but rights shared by all. The morning sunlight streamed through Jasmine's office window as she reviewed plans for her next advocacy campaign. Months had passed since her ordeal at Harrington Jewelers, and though the memory lingered, it no longer brought pain, only purpose. Jasmine had become a beacon of resilience, traveling across the country to share her story at conferences, schools, and community events. "It's not just about what happened to me," she often said, her voice steady yet passionate. "It's about creating a world where no one has to endure the humiliation of prejudice." Through her work, she established a foundation focused on educating businesses about bias and promoting inclusivity. Testimonials poured in from individuals inspired by her courage, people who now felt emboldened to challenge discrimination in their own lives. Across town, Mr. Harrington sat in his now quiet home, his gaze fixed on a framed newspaper clipping. The headline a stark reminder of his fall from grace. The weight of public backlash and personal loss had forced him to confront the biases he had long ignored. Though it was a slow and painful process, he began to understand the consequences of his actions. His store was gone, but his future remained unwritten. Whether or not he would change was uncertain, but the seeds of reflection had been planted. As Jasmine stood before a crowd at a community event, her closing words resonated deeply. "Change is hard, but it starts with each of us. Together, we can dismantle prejudice and replace it with understanding and respect." The audience rose in applause, their energy filling the room. Jasmine smiled, knowing her journey had just begun. This wasn't just her victory, it was a step forward for everyone. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and share to spread its powerful message. Subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories of justice, resilience, and transformation.